Get started. The minutes of the last meeting have been distributed to everyone. Are there any amendments to the minutes? Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All right. So, can we take that, all in favor of adopting the amendments, or minutes?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have a question. I would like to adopt the minutes, however, I requested a report from the Indiana Economic Development Council on minority businesses, in which they received those dollars and never did receive that report, that written report from them, from at that time, Ms. Basso. How would we proceed with that?
Is there anybody here from IDC?
IDC will be presenting at some point today.
Sorry?
IEDC's on the agenda later today with the
All right,
ready
fine.
grants.
So can, all those in favor of adopting the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we have agenda that's been distributed to the members. Are there amendments to the agenda? Yes, Representative Hamilton.
Can we have introductions?
I'm gonna do that once I get to here, yeah. So agenda is placed on the table for discussion. Before that, though, we're gonna allow Dr. Mearns to have an opening remark or two.
Well, good morning, and I know you have a very busy agenda, so I'll be very brief. It's a pleasure on behalf of Ball State University to welcome the Budget Committee and your staff back to our campus. We appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you over the last day to share some thoughts about what's happening with the Muncie Community Schools and to talk about things that are happening on our campus. But please know how grateful we are to all of you and to the people that you serve. We're proud to partner with you to improve the educational outcomes for Indiana residents and to continue to contribute to the ongoing economic and civic vitality of the state of Indiana. As I leave, I know you're in great hands. Becca Rice and our staff do a wonderful job of hosting events like this, so if you need anything during the duration of your meeting, please know that we're here to serve you. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mearns. Thank you for hosting us. Becca, you've done a fantastic job, very well organized. We were able to find our way around with no problems. Nobody got lost. So, last time we were here for the groundbreaking of the science building there, and now to see that whole project finished. So I just want to say thank you for your hospitality. With that, we will go around and do introductions. So we'll start at that end of the table.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Carrie Hamilton, State Representative from House District 87 on the north side of Indianapolis.
Fadi Kadura, State Senator, District 30, representing north side of Indy, south side of Hamilton County.
State Senator Eddie Melton, representing Senate District 3, which is Gary, Maryville, Hobart, Crown Point, Lake Station, and New Chicago.
What about Susan?
Oh, I'm sorry. Susan Preble, Senate Democrat Fiscal Analyst.
Eric Gonzalez, Fiscal Analyst, House Democrats.
State Representative Gregory Porter, House District 96, Indianapolis.
Krista Ricci, Senior Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus.
Ryan Mishler, State Senate District 9, that's Elkhart, St. Joe, Kosciuszko, and Marshall counties.
Tim Brown, State Representative, District 41, Crawfordsville, Indiana.
Ben Tooley, Fiscal Analyst for the House Republicans.
Zach Jackson, I'm the Governor's Budget Director.
Joe Habig, Deputy Budget Director.
Lisa Ackelbert, Deputy Budget Director.
Seth Hinshaw, Fiscal Analyst, Senate Republicans.
Liza Bartlett Sherman, Fiscal Analyst for the House Republicans.
Randhir Jha, Chief Economist with the Legislative Services Agency.
All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started on the agency projects. And we're going to start with the state police. And I have Major Williams.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Major Jerry Williams was not able to attend today, so my name is Michael Wiley. I'll be representing the state police this morning, and I would like to ask for additional funding. We have a need to replace the roofs at our Fort Wayne, Evansville, and logistics facilities. A recent study was conducted that showed if the roofs are not replaced, it will lead to deterioration that will not be able to be maintained through just regular routine maintenance. The age of our roofs, our average age is approximately 24 years. The size of the roofs is 63,000 square feet. The roof replacement materials will be made of both asphalt and rubber materials, and should have a life expectancy of approximately 30 years. A delay in replacing the roofs would lead to possible damage of our laboratory equipment, evidence, and other critical supplies necessary for our daily operations. So we're asking for additional funding in the amount of $906,900 for your consideration, please.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next, Indiana War Memorial, Matt Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. Matt Kent with Department of Administration, representing War Memorial this morning. The War Memorial is requesting funding for elevator modernization at the Shrine Building, and this is the building we toured last budget committee, and I believe some of you might have actually rode on this elevator. The current elevator's mechanical system is made up of parts that we can basically no longer find to replace or manufacture. And so with some of these parts approaching 90 years of service, it's time we go ahead and update those with a modern, up-to-date system. This will lead to lower maintenance costs and actually fewer outages for the elevator. The work will also include replacing basically all the mechanical systems and updating with new fire and safety systems for the elevator. We do intend to keep the cab as its current state, so it will still have that historic nature to the cab. Pretty straightforward project, but if there's any questions, we can deal with those.
Any questions for Matt?
Thank you.
Next, we have Indiana State Fair Commission, John.
I can do the last name part.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Pfaffenberger, Vice President, Chief Financial Officer of the Indiana State Fair Commission. As we busy ourselves preparing for your 2021 Indiana State Fair, which opens this Friday, we're here to request the release of some R&R funds for a couple of projects. The first on your agenda today, we requested the release of $286,000 to replace two 70-ton rooftop units on our Champions Pavilion. The building's approximately 66,000 square feet, was constructed in 1922 and received a full facility renovation in 2003. The Champions Pavilion is used on a year-round basis for sports, commercial events, exhibitions, and serves as a livestock facility during the state fair. We replaced two of the 4 70-ton RTUs in 2020, and this project will replace the remaining two. The average lifespan of RTUs is typically 15 years. The remaining units on our building are 24 years old, causing increasing amount of emergency repairs, maintenance, and inefficiencies. Any questions? Okay. Second item, we request the release of $539,000 to perform upgrades to lighting systems from fluorescent bulbs to LED lighting and install occupancy sensors and connect the LED lighting to our internal lighting controls. The project will upgrade fixtures in the West Pavilion, South Pavilion, and Exposition Halls, which have a combined 352,000 square feet and are some of our most used buildings on the fairgrounds for events. We expect an annual cost savings to be upwards of $70,000 to $80,000 per year with the installation of these LED systems. Any questions on that item?
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question is, are the work going to be done? Do you have people on staff to do this work, or will this work be contracted out?
We will contract it out, sir.
And you're going to do the traditional bid process?
We will, yes.
It's the most reasonable bid, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to know who get that bid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item, we're requesting release of $686,552 for fire alarm and electrical upgrades. This request funds fire panel installations and electrical upgrades in 7 buildings on our campus that were constructed between 1919 and 2003 across the campus. In addition, this work will do significant electrical wiring and panel work in the Indiana Arts Building. Work will be completed in a number of different buildings on our campus. Any questions on that item? Okay. We request the release of $264,000 in funding to perform infrastructure upgrades across the State Fairgrounds campus to be ADA compliant. The current streetscape on our campus was developed in the early 1900s and has received multiple upgrades such as new roads, sidewalks, and curbs. This project will allow us to continue the installation of ADA curb ramps, detectable warning systems, handrails at stairwells, and in ramps and accessible doors. Questions on that one?
What's the time frame for completing the ADA compliance upgrades?
Yeah, the ADA compliance timeline, we will bid the work in we'll do the A&E design work in September. We will bid the work in November, and we look to have it completed by spring of 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Department of Transportation, Steve McAvoy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McAvoy, NDOT Statewide Facilities Director. We have two projects on the agenda today. The first one is a request for $125,000 for the A&E fee to construct a new 15,000 square foot salt building at our Cloverdale unit. The existing dome was built in 1984, and our capacity there does not meet our current and future winter operations need. Furthermore, the existing building does not allow for loading and offloading of salt inside and out of the weather. This type of loading requires significant backing of the loader and dump truck, which adds extra time and cost to our winter operations. Safety is also a major concern, as the potential for collision with the loader and salt building is high. Some additional highlights of the new building involve a stage 1 pre-wash pit inside the building and a fully contained brine making operation under roof. In order to construct the new salt building on this site, the existing salt dome will have to be demolished. Questions?
Zach?
Steve, how do you, I mean, we tend to see one or two of these a year.
Yep.
How do we benefit from having the A&E work that we do on one project? How do we benefit from that as we do another A&E on another salt bar? I mean,
right.
Is there something that we can use over and over again as opposed to paying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do, right? We typically use the same designer for this type of work. And in the case of this project, the fee is about 5%. Where a typical A&E fee, when you have a new and unique project, would be 7 or 8%. But every project is unique. Every site has its own issues. So the majority of the fee is spent on site investigation, surveys, soil boring, and trying to adapt the building to the site. But we do see, an economy in this because we use the same type of prototypical building design.
Thanks.
Yep. Any questions? Okay. Second project is we are requesting $8,700,000 for the construction of the new LaGrange unit and salt building. This new unit building will replace a 53-year-old, 2,500 square foot Brimfield unit and a 54-year-old, 1,800 square foot Shipshewana unit at a new site in LaGrange. A new salt building will also be built to replace the two existing salt domes. The existing unit buildings do not allow for OSHA-approved work clearances or proper ventilation in the garage space. In addition, the age and condition of the structures contributed to other operational environmental issues, such as ADA accessibility, the inability to wash trucks under roof, site drainage, other stormwater-related issues. With all other salt buildings that we replace, the new building will allow us to offload and load salt under roof. After construction of these new buildings, the Brimfield and Shipshewana unit building sites will be sold. Questions?
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next is the Adjutant General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Brigadier General Tim Winslow from the Indiana National Guard, the Director of the Joint Staff. The Adjutant General was not able to make it here with us today. So your Indiana National Guard continues to be globally engaged for our federal mission, but also engaged across the state for COVID support in our dual role as state support missions as well. Our Shelbyville project today being discussed is just one of the armories where we conduct our state and federal training mission for our aviation units. And it was built in 1972, as you see in the work up to the testimony today. But the technology and the helicopters have changed significantly since then. But over time, this project was scoped over 3 years ago as it was initiated. So we've had administrative code changes and some design changes that have led us to some cost overruns for connecting the water main. So we're here today to ask for the $184,236 for those cost overruns. And just to elaborate a bit on the risk to us for project completion is we have another 100% federally funded project that is associated with completing this water main connection, and that's a $12 million project to upgrade that facility. So that's what's at stake for us in the asking for the cost overruns for today.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we've got the university projects, and we're going to start with Indiana and Dr. Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee and staff. Tom Morrison with Indiana University, glad to be with you today. On behalf of the trustees of IU, I have one project for you this morning. This is on our IUPUI campus. This is for the renovation of the first 2 floors of the Dunlop building for the Family Medicine Clinic, which is a joint operation between IU Health and the IU School of Medicine. The clinic building right now is located at the Methodist Hospital site. The building it occupies will be demolished to make room for the new hospital that is going to be built at that site. And so it created the need to move the clinic operations. It was a better location to move it proximate to the Riley Hospital for Children on the IUPUI campus. And so we are putting it in the first 2 floors of the Dunlop building. The Dunlop building was previously one of the buildings we received from Eskenazi Health, formerly Wishard, and it was the burn unit hospital at that location. It has been vacant. We are renovating the overall structure right now. This is to use the first 2 floors for the clinic operations. The cost of the project is $13 million for just under 60,000 square feet, be totally paid for by a grant from IU Health, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? All right. Thank you. Next, we have Purdue, and we have Ann Heslett.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for this opportunity to join you today. We are here to seek your approval for the construction of 2 projects at Purdue on our West Lafayette campus, a secure research facility and a hypersonics and applied research facility. Earlier this spring, Purdue announced a set of strategic next moves initiatives that are designed to advance the university's competitive advantage. And these building projects support 2 of those next moves initiatives, including one for national security and technology and another for applied research. Let me start with the secure research facility. This project involves the renovation of part of an existing building to create 7,000 gross square feet of secure working environment where industry and government partners can receive and review secure documents and other materials. Purdue does not currently have this type of space or capability on our West Lafayette campus, and that is eliminating us from consideration for some projects and other research opportunities that are critical to national security and defense. This is a $5.5 million project. The funds are coming from our operating funds reserves. None of the reserves funds being used are state dollars, and no state funding is being requested for this project. We're looking to begin construction in August of this year with a scheduled completion date in December and occupancy in January of 2022. Shifting to the hypersonics and applied research facility, this project includes the construction of a new building that would be 65,000 gross square feet in size and have research and limited office space. The proposed facility would house 2 wind tunnels, as well as a hypersonics advanced manufacturing technology center, and then the necessary support space. Each of the wind tunnels would have its own laser lab in the building that would allow for some of the laser measuring that is needed for the technology being used in the wind tunnels. This project is $41 million, and it would be a combination of indirect cost recovery, operating funds reserves, and gift funds. Like the secure research facility, within that operating funds reserves space, none of those reserves funds being used are state dollars, and no additional state funding is being requested for this project. We hope to begin construction in February of next year and have a scheduled completion date of March 2023 and occupancy in April of that year. So with that overview, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Representative Brown.
Thank you. What's the general category that these operating reserves come from?
They are in earnings from previous investments.
Okay.
Any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all the university projects. So now we have the review items. We've got FSSA, Allison Taylor. There's one there. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Allison Taylor, I'm Director of the Medicaid program within FSSA, and we have a handful of items for your review today. We're going to start with out-of-state children's hospital reimbursement. I think you probably just got an updated handout on that. So this state plan amendment will allow Medicaid to reimburse children's hospitals in a state bordering Indiana at a rate that is, and this was in statute from legislation this past year, 130% of the Medicaid reimbursement rate. Language in the statute prescribed Medicaid plus 30 or Medicare, and just a nuance here is that there's really not Medicare rates for children's services generally, so the Medicaid plus 30 was much more administratively feasible. For your reference, there's about 29 children's hospitals bordering Indiana. We looked in 2019, there were about 13 hospitals that actually had claims. So if that gives you some context of the scope. And so I guess if there are questions, I can try to address them about the actual reimbursement methodology, but you have an updated fiscal in front of you because I think the last fiscal we prepared was in February. Since then, obviously, we let the 3% reduction in hospital rate reimbursement sunset, so we had to update. And so you'll see the fiscal here for fee-for-service. If we looked at the managed care side, that'd be about 3 times the impact. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, Allison, quick
Sure.
question. So you're basing on the number of children that are currently seeking treatment or whatever out of state or care. And so, but if we're going to pay more, wouldn't you speculate that the number of patients will probably increase as well?
I don't know. So I don't know in the methodology. We just went based on 2019. Gosh, Dr. Brown, you might know better than I. I don't know that we anticipate a large influx. I think we've heard from the centers that individuals in Indiana typically go to because of location and access. I don't know that we're gonna unearth new locations with challenges. And we're also really, focusing on the in-state network too. So we really, really hope we don't have additional folks going out of state. We need to build our in-state network. And we are gonna continue to do that in Northwest Indiana to try to prevent folks from having to go to Chicago.
Yes.
Doctor or anything of that nature, but I agree with you in terms of I don't foresee an increase or demand. I do see that this is just creating more access and opportunity for the families that was looking for closer services. So I haven't seen the full numbers, but I wouldn't project that there would be an increase in my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd agree.
On here too, you have 21 and 22, but looking at the bill, wouldn't that be 22 and 23? Because his effective July 1, 2021.
I think I passed out all my copies. Hold on, let me scan back. So what are you saying?
Well, then you would be fiscal years 22 and 23 then,
Oh, thanks.
for the impact. We shouldn't have an impact in 21. If I'm reading the bill right.
Yeah, so this is effective July 1st, 2021. So yeah, state fiscal year, that'd be 22. Man.
So it's 22 and 23, not
Right.
21 and 22.
I
Okay.
think so. Can I confirm with you that we just put the wrong number there?
That would be good.
Okay. I know that matters, so we'll make sure we do that. I think we caught this last night and we were heading out the door. We updated, printed, and I grabbed them and came straight from home. So I apologize if we have the wrong number or year, but we can confirm.
All right, go ahead and continue.
Okay. Are there any more questions? And again, we'll make sure we get you the right exhibit there. Do you want me to move to the next one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So next we have, actually, the next two state plan amendments that I'm going to present are complementary or related, and they involve COVID-19 vaccine administration. So this first one, we're changing the methodology that we reimburse FQHCs and rural health clinics. So these are really our frontline primary health providers. And so this state plan amendment will specifically enable us to do two things: pay FQHCs and RHCs for the administration of the COVID-19 vaccine separately from their prospective payment system. So this type of providers, they really get kind of a bundled rate. We are going above and beyond to encourage vaccines. And this is very similar to states across the country. We're all doing it. So we're paying outside of the PPS to provide additional reimbursement to encourage vaccination. In addition, we're paying a little bit more. We're paying at the Medicare rates. And so this state plan amendment, we've been doing this through the public health emergency. The state plan amendment will kind of codify that and allow us to keep doing that into the foreseeable future. We know COVID vaccine will be a public health and Medicaid policy priority for a while, and so we see this policy sticking around for some time, and we're capturing that in the state plan. Happy to take any questions if there are any. Okay, the third item is related, and this is for kind of the rest of the Medicaid portfolio. This is a general amendment to our state plan saying that we can continue to pay at Medicare rates for the administration of COVID vaccine and antibody treatment administration. So again, same concept. We've been doing this through the PHE. We want to continue into the foreseeable future as we really push for increasing our vaccination rates. So happy to take any questions there. Okay. And then finally, our last state plan amendment. This one is actually a technical change to align with Indiana's current process, but it just catches up our contract with CMS to clarify that the list of providers who can order diabetes self-management training does include advanced practice nurses. So those are like nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, certified nurse midwife, and physician assistants. So we needed some clarification in our contract with CMS to ensure we have enhanced access to those services. So happy to take any questions there. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And we'll follow up on the first item.
Next, we have Department of Education, Mark Newman, and the Public Broadcasting.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mark Newman representing Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. I appreciate the opportunity to join you for this meeting and for your continued support of the services our stations provide Hoosiers. Public broadcasting has always been careful with its spending and strives to stretch every dollar of its public funding, using it wisely and leveraging it with private support. On average, IPBS has historically matched each public dollar with $11 from the private sector. We take immense pride in the public-private partnerships we maintain because of what can be achieved cooperatively when institutions like ours come together for the greater good. Our commitment to Indiana is evident in multiple ways. Public affairs programming is one way, community engagement is another way, and of course there is our historic commitment to early childhood education and lifelong learning. Despite the challenges of the last many months, IPBS member stations have remained true to their education mandate by aiding K-12 students, teachers, and parents across Indiana, including through the recently activated datacasting technology. The technology uses public television broadcast signals to deliver classroom content to student computers, where viable internet access is not available, too expensive, or restricted. Through datacasting and corresponding learning management systems, teachers are able to manage and curate the content that students receive on their devices, and those students are able to access this content seamlessly. IPBS is also now expanding its datacasting implementation to include adult learners and incarcerated populations. One of our expectations is that this work will help incarcerated individuals be better able to find employment upon their release. With this background, the current budget bill calls for $3.6 million to be distributed in fiscal year 2022 to our 9 public radio and 8 public television stations here in Indiana. In addition, a 1% reversion target was imposed by the state budget agency, reducing that sum to $3.564 million. Of the $3.564 million, and consistent with the budget bill language, $509,142.86 is earmarked for equal distribution to our member radio stations. $3,054,857.14 is designated for our TV stations. Finally, consistent with the last budget, we were requesting that the distribution be made in 2 payments, 75% of the total coming in August 2021 and the remaining 25% in January of 2022. Committee members, you should all have a copy of the letter that I submitted to the state budget agency, which these proposed amounts and the payment schedule. I again wish to express the gratitude of our stations to this body, as well as to the General Assembly and to Governor Eric Holcomb, who in February received the coveted Champion of Public Broadcasting Award from America's public television stations. In the near future, broadcasters will be converting to next-generation television. We would like to open the dialogue with all of you in a serious way to address this need. Years ago, under former Senator Bob Meeks, an appropriation was made to allow our TV stations to convert from analog to digital broadcasting. The equipment from that transition is reaching the end of its usable life, and we now need to think about providing for the next generation of digital broadcasting equipment for Hoosiers. Again, thank you for your support, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the IEDC, Luke and Emily. Oh, no, you're not Luke. Mark? He's on the list.
Thank you, Senator, and apologize for the mix-up on who was going to be here to speak today. But you want to first start by saying thank you. My name is Mark Waski. I'm Vice President for Innovation and Strategic Initiatives at the IEDC. And we appreciate the opportunity to update the committee on the progress that's been made to develop the Regional Economic Acceleration and Development Initiative, or READY, the READY program, and our plans on how we plan to invest the $500 million that the General Assembly graciously gave the IEDC for this transformative initiative. Through the leadership of Governor Holcomb and thanks to your strong support of the state's talent attraction and retention efforts, we've built significant excitement and engagement between cities, towns, and counties within geographic regions across the state. These collaborative efforts in 18 regions covering 91 of 92 counties are expected to produce long-term strategic plans that include projects and programs that the region believes are necessary to accelerate their population and economic growth. After these plans are submitted later this summer, the IEDC will then evaluate those documents to determine which have the greatest likelihood to attract and retain people in the state. In particular, the IEDC will assess the regional proposals using criteria within 4 primary areas, including the economic development potential of the plan, specifically how likely it is to result in growing the state's economy and attracting additional investment within the region, the extent to which the region and the plan considers the rural areas of their communities, the level of regional collaboration in the plan's development, and finally, the plan's alignment with the state's broader economic development priorities. The IEDC's analysis will consider the impact of not just the physical assets that will be developed or expanded utilizing funding through this initiative, but also on other proposed investments in programs and initiatives focused on attracting and retaining people in Indiana, including in communicating the region's vision and activities, receiving READY dollars, in outreach, engagement, and in the overall environment in support of the state's goals and aspirations. Following the review, the IEDC's Board of Directors will consider recommendations in its December 2021 meeting for funding commitments to regions that demonstrate the potential and capacity to make coordinated investments to spur economic growth. Before I conclude, I just want to let you know, Representative Porter, that we apologize if our last communication from your request regarding SBRG funds didn't make it through to you. I have sent that to Eric, Susan, and other fiscal staff to be able to share with you, and happy to answer any questions that you may have after you get a chance to look at that. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Melton.
I'm going to speak specifically about the READY grant, just real quick. I know over the 500 million, is there a budget per region, or is that kind of a total bucket of funds that's available for everyone to access?
That's a great question, Senator. And there isn't a specific budget per region, but we have been communicating is that we will invest up to $50 million per eligible region, depending on the needs and their capacity to meet the match requirements that we've laid out.
Got it. What's the match requirement again?
For every dollar that the state would invest through local, private, and public funds, another $4 would come to the table.
All right. And the next question is there a requirement for there to be collaboration among different agencies, entities, or can a single agency or municipality request of funding? Is there a kind of a scoring rubric that's going to lean one way or the other?
So our expectation is that there would be collaboration and communities working together to determine which projects they want to prioritize for that funding, and then we will direct money into the region through the regional organization that is leading the effort.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes the review items. So is there a motion to remove any of the items from the agenda?
Move to accept the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
All right. So now we will move on to the discussion items. And we'll start with Chris Johnston. You have the first two, so.
I apologize for that. No. Good morning.
Well, Zach was on the original one, so I guess this is
Yes,
a good thing.
Call that effective delegation. Good morning, Chairman Mishler and members of the committee and staff. Good morning. In your packet was a few slides on the topic we're going to discuss, the calculation of excess reserves. Thought we'd put some slides together because this is a topic that we have not really discussed at this forum in about 9 years. It was 2012 the last time we had this presentation. And 2 weeks ago, Zach Jackson and I joined Auditor State Klutz for the fiscal year 21 closeout presentation. And at that presentation, we announced that the combined reserves totaled $3.9 billion. That's 23% of our current year appropriations, or the fiscal year 21 appropriations. Probably a surprise to all of us, that balance. The last revenue forecast was presented mid-April, I think April 15th, and immediately after that presentation, and by the end of April, that forecast for the month of April was exceeded by $100 million. In May, the forecast was exceeded by $500 million. And in June, the forecast was exceeded by $600 million. So just in 75 days or so, $1.2 billion over forecast. When you think about the April forecast, that actually raised the fiscal year forecast from December's forecast, where the General Assembly was considering the budget, I think by $420 million. So when you roll it all up, the actual excess revenues from December, when we went into building the budget, was almost $1.7 billion. So it did indeed require us to meet these obligations of doing the excess revenue calculation by July 31st. And then it also requires a presentation to this body by September 30th. And we're going to walk through both of those obligations here this morning. So I will get to a spreadsheet here shortly, but the calculation is essentially you take your combined balances, you exclude the portion of the combined balances. You know, Zach often refers to them as the individual savings accounts, but you remove the tuition support reserve from that calculation. And to the extent that the net combined reserves exceed 12.5% of our current year appropriations, that is subject to the automatic taxpayer credit and the distribution to the pension stabilization fund. There is a de minimis amount that years ago the General Assembly had stated that you at least have to have $50 million excess in order for it to be a worthwhile exercise to go through the distribution. But as I said, the distribution is 50% to the pension stabilization and then 50% to the automatic taxpayer refund. For taxpayers to qualify, you need to have filed an adjusted gross income tax return in 2020 and have an adjusted gross income tax liability in 2021. And so the amount of the refund is you take the 50% allocation to the taxpayer credit and divide by the number of qualifying taxpayers, and it is a refundable credit. Here is the math. So the $3.9 billion, you reduce it by the tuition reserve balance. 12.5% of fiscal year '22 appropriations is just under $2.3 billion, leaving a net of almost $1.1 billion, and then the 50-50 split at roughly $545 million. The Department of Revenue is pulling out their old work papers from 9 years ago and is assembling the team to get prepared to operationalize the taxpayer credit. The actual number, the denominator that we divide into that $545 million will not truly be known until about November, because they're still processing. Even though the bulk of returns have been processed, there's still some that, when people file extensions, will come in all the way through November 14th, I believe. And so that was when we will have a better idea of what the individual taxpayer credit will be. And I think that was about the time in 2012 when the announcements regarding both the amount and the procedures for that. Technology has changed significantly since 2012, and so our charge to the Department of Revenue is to make this as efficient as possible for the taxpayer when they file their returns for this year in the tax processing year of 2022. The last page in this packet is just a little bit of the history of the combined reserves since 2011. And so you can see in 2012, the last time this was triggered. And again, this is triggered in odd-numbered years. Or the exercise, the calculation is performed in odd-numbered years at the end of our biennium. And so in 2012, you can see the total balance there, of which the allocation was $360 million between the two distributions. So we're significantly above that. The 2016, there was a one-time distribution for roads. And then you can see the dip last year because of the deferral of tax, individual and corporate income tax in 2020. So you can see the dip. We went down to about $1.4 billion in reserves. And then obviously tremendous growth this year, triggering that calculation. The one thing that I would want to point out is 2022. The General Assembly put in an additional test for fiscal year 2022, that in the event that balances in excess, combined reserves in excess of $2.5 billion, that entire amount above $2.5 billion goes directly to the Pension Stabilization Fund and to the benefit of the pre-96 Teachers Retirement Fund. You can see there, when we post this to our website, we'll correct this. And so it really, that blue bar should really land right at $2.5 billion. The total estimated, and again, these are forecasts for 22 and 23. The forecast is just under $3.2 billion, even for fiscal year 22. And so that would actually, we would adjust what you see on the screen here and in your packet from the 619. That'll end up being, again, 695 when we post it to our website. And then, so then that would go to the Pension Stabilization Fund, and then the forecasted reserve balance in fiscal year 23 is $2.6 billion. The other point, besides the good news for taxpayers, I would like to point out that these are significant contributions to the pre-96 plan, which is a pay-as-you-go plan, and is the one thing that when you look at the state's pension plans, that unfunded, when you see different reports out there, the rating agencies actually are, they understand the discipline of the General Assembly that has been making scheduled appropriations since 1995. And so that's taken into consideration when they think about our AAA rating. You'll see other ratings services and research bodies that will look at our retirement funds and not really rate Indiana very high. It's because of this Teachers Retirement Fund, the pre-96 Teachers Retirement Fund, which was capped in 95 And then we have a very well-funded teachers' retirement, 1996 and beyond, teachers' retirement fund. The reason I point that out is because there are scheduled appropriations of $1 billion a year already. It's the third largest appropriation from the general fund. And so not only at the end of fiscal year 21 was there an additional $600 million contribution, now there's going to be another $545 million contribution, and then potentially next year another substantial contribution that collectively is really going to improve the fiscal and financial status of the pre-96 plan. Let me stop there and with any questions from the committee.
I got 2 questions for you, Chris. So I know you said you won't have numbers till November, but do you have any kind of approximate estimate of what that taxpayer refund is per person, like even a rough range?
Well, in 2012, it was $111. But I would presume that there's more taxpayers than there were in 2012, so the denominator is going to grow. So I don't think just taking 111 and increasing it by the 50% increase of the going to 545 from the 362 of 9 years ago, it's going to be something less than that.
Because you could have more taxpayers.
Because we'll have more taxpayers to spread it across. If I had to put a range, I would probably 140 to 160, something like, depending on
Roughly.
Yeah.
So since it's a tax credit, obviously people use an accountant, their accountant should know how to factor that in. But for those that use like, I don't know, a TurboTax and those kind of things, will that automatically figure the ATR for those people?
That's what Department of Revenue is going to be working on this fall, because all of the changes to the tax code, as soon as the legislature is done, they begin working on all of those features. And so if you use a software package, they'll be working with those vendors to hopefully include that in the calculation.
Any other questions?
And one of the things I mentioned is technology, advancing since 2012. About 90% of the individual taxpayers file electronically with Department of Revenue. So we really want to keep it within that domain.
Anyone else? All right, next.
Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay. Okay. Just waiting for the high sign.
Oh, I just waiting. I was trying to organize my papers.
Okay. The next topic is the update on the CARES Act funding, which I've been before you previously, and then also the American Rescue Plan, or the ARP. You hear people refer to ARP or ARPA. And I think at the June meeting, I gave an update as far as drawing the money down and the status. Not a lot has changed, but I do, maybe out in your districts, you'll hear from some of your local communities about the distribution of those funds. So I want to touch on some of the highlights in the last 30 days. I think really at your next meeting in the fall, we'll have even more to report, because let me again repeat myself from the June meeting. The CARES Act and the Coronavirus Relief Fund was really to attack the needs driven by the pandemic. So a lot of medical expenses, health expenses, standing up testing sites, all of that. The ARP is really more forward-looking, and there's a greater runway. We have until actually 2026 to spend the money. It needs to be obligated by 2024, and in fact, U.S. Treasury is advising states and recipients of this money to take their time and think about how best to use this money. And so just a quick update on the Coronavirus Relief Fund. you recall, it was $2.4 billion, and we really handled that in four major uses, or four areas: the public health response, the economic and business relief, local government, and then we recovered some state costs, which helped with the closeout, the fiscal year closeout. What we're doing now for the next 6 months, and so you can still cover expenses incurred through December 31st. There'll be a settlement period that you could actually cut checks and actually make the disbursements probably for about 90 days into 2022, but they have to be for expenses that were incurred through December 31st. And then there will be a final, our reporting will continue through September 2022 to the U.S. Treasury website. So some of the things that we're working on are the different agencies that have been using some of these funds. And if you recall, Department of Health, a lot of testing and contact tracing and vaccine distribution expenses were used there. FSSA, we used a lot of provider support grants. And IEDC, Mark mentioned it recently. In the last session, I think an additional $60 million was appropriated to IEDC for their small business restart and hospitality program. What we need to be doing is monitoring the use of those reserves and seeing if there are expenses that we hadn't accounted for, but then also looking at if there's any residuals to come back and bring back before this committee as potential alternate uses for those funds. I'm confident that there's plenty of uses that are out there that it can be used for, but it's just making those changes and bringing those back before this body for if they were different than what they were originally planned. In the ARP, this is the same slide as last month. And if you recall, we had FSSA and the Department of Education make presentations. They have very sizable funds. This is the page that is just coming from the federal health and human services areas, but being directed to FSSA, Department of Health, and the Housing and Community Development Authority. The follow-up on the FSSA and Department of Education, they've submitted their plans after making the presentation to you. They've submitted their plans to their federal awarding agencies. They're awaiting the approval there, but they've already started the planning, but no money has spent. They're still waiting to hear from the federal government. Again, these have longer periods of performance. These are grants that are not, I'm going to talk in a second here about the State Recovery Fund, but these are grants that are going directly to state agencies. And they have, in some cases, they have even greater lead times than what the state does. In fact, FSSA has one grant that they can use, or maybe it's housing, has a grant that they could use all the way out to 2030. And so each of these individual grants have their own performance periods, starting in 2021, but it could be to 2023, 25. I mean, it's all set by the federal awarding agency. And in fact, there's some seasonality to it. I'll point out the low-income energy assistance program at Housing and Community Development. That's additional funding for a program that is an annual program that they get funding from the federal government, but they will be using that starting with the heating season coming up this fall. So they've received their award, but they'll really be using it from starting November on through March and April of next year. A few more of these individual grants. We've got the ESSER grant, or the Elementary and Secondary Education, and Katie Jenner was here last month to talk about that. That is in a review status. They've submitted the plan after making the presentation here and are pursuing that. And then some of the other grants that are coming directly to state agencies, such as the Arts Commission, and even the state library is receiving some funds. In the lower right-hand corner is where I really want to spend some more time and talk about the state and local fiscal recovery funds. It is about $3.1 billion that is been awarded to the state of Indiana. There's a state capital projects fund at the $200 million level. We really have not received any direction on how to use that money yet. And then the local fiscal recovery fund, the first two boxes there, those entities receive the money directly from the federal government. And then the non-entitlement units, that $432 million, comes to the state of Indiana, and we're simply a transfer agent. Comes in, they have to meet certain application requirements, and then it gets sent out. Both the $3.1 billion to the state and the $432 million, we are receiving two installments. We've received the first 50%. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we had the application in, and we are waiting for that money to come in, and it came in on June 30th. Both halves, the $1.5 billion to the state and about $216 million to be distributed to the locals, which is what this slide covers. As I mentioned, the funds are available for obligation through 2024. The performance period or actual spending of the money can extend out to 2026. There was a very extensive, I left the final out. It was called the interim final rule, and it's only the federal government can call things, right? Interim final rule. The comment period ended on July 16th, and so we're waiting to get the final rule and see if there's any changes to how we can actually use the money. The major categories, as we've talked about before, there's really 4 major buckets, and then there's a couple of prohibitions. It's responding to the public health emergency and the negative economic impacts from that. Premium pay for providing premium pay due to the public health emergency, investments in water, sewer, and broadband, and then government services to the extent of reduced general revenue. You'll probably recall that tortured discussion I put you through last month of what that means. Can't use it for pension funds, and then you cannot use it to offset a reduction in net tax revenue or actions that have been taken to reduce our own revenues. The General Assembly appropriated the $3.1 billion, and so here's a reminder of the appropriations of the ARP. And so a couple of things that are going on that have started. The DOC is working with the state personnel on the stipends, hazard pay stipends, and I believe state police is doing the same for their $1,600 stipends. DOC is, they've got a QPA for the stab vests, so they're starting that process of purchasing those. The state police has started deploying their body cameras. Superintendent Carter mentioned the other day they're deploying about 20 a day there. The local body cams, that's one, the state police is not really a grant managing agency, and so we'll probably do an MOU with the Criminal Justice Institute, which is in the business of administering grants with local, or Homeland Security. Oh, I was correct, as Zach said, Homeland Security. Either of those two agencies could, they handle grants, so it's going to be Homeland Security. You heard from Mark Waske on the READY grant, and so that application process and guidance is out there for that. The Career Accelerator has had numerous meetings trying to structure that, get that ready to go. The UI Trust Fund appropriation is there. I mean, we could transfer that when appropriate. The mental health grants and the health challenges grants, FSSA and Department of Health are crafting and developing their program guidelines there. and then the water infrastructure grant program, and then the combined transportation and water programs. The IFA has done a call out for need, and probably not surprising, they are oversubscribed. They've received hundreds of applications and of hundreds of millions of dollars of requests. So that one, because it's $50 million each year, the IFA is probably going to have to figure out how to bracket these applications. And it may be, do you prioritize the communities that have the highest water and sewer bills, right? Because they have maybe a low rate-paying base. But they're going to have to look at that because it's multiples of what we have appropriated there. Let me stop here if there's questions on the actual appropriations that the General Assembly's made.
Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on the grants for the local body cams. I know you said working with an agency to deploy that. One of the things, well, I guess the question I would ask is, will they have to come up with the criteria or the requirements for that, for the grant?
The agency's Homeland Security developing, so they'll need to develop the program guidelines and eligibility.
The one thing I would suggest, and this is something similar, if you guys are exploring if this is going to have to be matching dollars, just being kind of sensitive to those municipalities that may not have the funds to support any type of matching funds. I use New Chicago, which is in my district, as an example. 1 square mile, low tax collection rate, but they want to acquire body cams, but they just don't have the tax revenue and other streams. So I just wanted to just put that on the table to say, just be aware of some municipalities that may not, if matching is going to be a requirement.
Okay. Well, Senator Melton, you raised an interesting point, not just for body cams, but for matching in general. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this, but locals, there's 542 entities are going to receive $430 million. And so I do think matching is an important component in any grant program, and doing it and sizing that appropriately. But I do think there could be opportunities to use some of their federal assistance to meet any match, whether it's for body cams or maybe other projects too.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. As long as they're federal funds, there's no limitations for that to be used towards that. I definitely would agree with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Well, Chris, wouldn't it just depend on what, when he's talking about the use of the federal funds, whatever criteria they can be used for, then they could be used for matching funds if that is an option that they can be used for the use.
The general guidance coming out of the federal government is, as long as there's not a prohibition of using other federal funds, you can use it. But and so we would obviously, want to allow that. But Senator Mishler raises an interesting point. So let's use body cams as an example. If you go back to our eligible uses, body cams don't fit in those 4 bullet points, or excuse me, the top 3 bullet points. So they would have to fit into the general government services to the extent that that community, New Chicago, or in this case, even the state of Indiana, we have the capacity to show that we've been impacted and had reduced revenue to use it the most broad way possible. And so we do have items on this appropriation list that have to meet that category, and body cams is one of them. And when I get to the reporting phase, we'll have to show our calculation here in about 30 days.
Of course, what I'm finding out is, the state lost revenue, but a lot of the locals did not. So a lot of the locals can't use that category because they didn't lose any money during that period.
The IFA, who's being the distribution agent for this, is hearing that more and more.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chris. In your appropriations to ARP, I want to ask you an update on the Invest Ed Career Accelerator.
Yes.
Do you know the status of that? You know, how many meetings they've had? What are the startup costs of that investment, $75 million? Because I know once those individuals go through these career path or whatever, to repay those dollars years down the road. So do you have an update on that? That's kind of perplexing to me.
Well, it's, they've been meeting frequently, so it's been I'll be attending one at 3 o'clock this afternoon. They've been meeting, I think this will be my 4th or 5th meeting, but the team, the actual nuts and bolts, have been meeting frequently. It's comprised of InvestEd, who's been directed, the money's been directed to them, but then DWD has been there as well. And CHE, representatives from CHE have been there as well, because we want this to be as a broad coverage of income sharing opportunities for a range of skill sets that they would be providing these services or providing this assistance to.
So when will I guess you're in the foundation stage now.
Right.
So when do they anticipate rolling this out to the public?
I really can't, I think they're hoping this fall, but there's the challenge with, and again, it's hard to know this in advance. There's a challenge because first you have to qualify, the providers of these services have to qualify as an eligible education program. So if I'm a certified nurse assistant, that's the services, that's the training I'm going to provide, my company will provide. We have certain things that are written into the statute of how I qualify my program. And unfortunately, it's all historical, saying that I've had certain placement rates and my placements have received a certain salary. Well, no one can really comply yet because we haven't started the program yet. And so we're trying to develop provisional guidelines to approve certain programs that they have to meet then those requirements within 6 months or a year of being operational. So there's a lot of just structuring of the program. So first, it's creating the providers of the services and the eligible entities to provide those skills training. But then it's also then the operational side. If I am the student and I sign up, then I have to sign in, then there's an operational agreement that a certain portion of my income, my paycheck, will go to repay the assistance I received. And so that's going to require hiring a back office administrator and all of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnston.
Yeah.
Representative Hamilton.
Chris, just a quick question about so we've got the Water Infrastructure Grant Program, but also the Transportation and Water Infrastructure Grant Program. Can you tell me what that's particularly intended for?
I think that's where we've segmented it out to cover not only water programs, but when you've got the two disciplines of having road works and underlying drainage issues and water management issues along with the road projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Go ahead and continue.
Well, let me just speed through some administrative things. So the reporting, we received a lengthy reporting memo. So there will be an interim report, a project and an expenditure report, and a performance report. Our first interim report will be due at the end of August. And that is really two things that we have to report on. Is our calculation for revenue replacement or our impact from lost revenue and the government services. So we will be highlighting the appropriations from the previous page that we will be using for those the money for those appropriations that have to fit into that category. And as I mentioned before, it looks like it's about a 50-50 split. So we've got the sewer, water, and sewer projects that are explicitly stated. We've got broadband that's explicitly stated, but then you've got examples such as body cams that are not. They would fall in the government services category, and there will be a dollar limit based on the U.S. Treasury's review of how much we can use for those projects. And it looks like it's about 50% of the $3 billion that have been appropriated. Again, that's just our initial estimate. There was a autocorrect problem in the third bullet under the interim where it says new distribution. That should be NEU. That's the non-entitlement units distribution status. The federal government wants to know, are we getting the money out to the local governments? I mentioned the $430 million, of which we've got half of it, $215 million. The status right now is about a third of the entities have filed their paperwork and have been approved for about half the money. As of last Friday, about $109 million out of the $215 has been distributed. And so we're working with AIM. You have to demonstrate that you're following up, that you're sending emails, calling, and encouraging them to apply. And so we'll be doing that. We have asked for a 30-day extension. They want to know every 30 days how you're doing, and so our 30-day clock ends on July 31st. We've already asked for the extension. They've acknowledged our request. Most other states are receiving approvals on that. Then, the project and expenditure report is going to be a quarterly obligation for us, the state governments, and I'll just say the larger entities, and then the smaller entities that receive less than $5 million, they report their project status and expenditures on an annual basis. And then there will be an annual performance report that carries a lot of other, they're asking about use of evidence, making decisions of where the money should go, expenditures by category, performance indicators, proof that you're not doing ineligible activities like depositing it in pension funds or backfilling tax cuts. I don't know how you prove the negative, but we're supposed to prove that in some way. And so that one will be a more elaborate and lengthy report. Capital Projects Fund, I mentioned, we're still waiting on the guidance for that $200 million fund. And then I mentioned here's the status on the local recovery fund. And so $2.6 billion went out to the larger entities directly. And then we're working with the non-entitlement units on the 432. We received 50% of it. And again, about 50% has already gone out the door. These are all the requirements. So you see this 7 or 8 bullets. As much as we thought that it would just be coming to the state and sending it back out, there's many things that the local units of government have to supply and attest to before the money goes out. And so that might be part of the reason for just being at the halfway point right now. And as I mentioned, we asked for the extension on July 26th. Let me stop there. See if there's any questions.
For Chris? Senator Cadora?
Chris, thank you for your presentation. I just have a couple of questions going back at the ARP plan or appropriations. The first, I was interested in supporting a piece of legislation this last session that dealt with the FAFSA applications. However, before receiving the final budget forecast, we heard from counselors across the state that they were overwhelmed. The caseload per counselor was too high, and that was the primary reason why they objected to it. But now that I see InvestEd, if I recall correctly, I think Senator Lysing, when she introduced that bill, she said, even though we don't have the appropriations to support that bill, InvestEd can help school districts with filling the FAFSA application. My question is, what are the guidelines, or does OMB or which entity influences how InvestEd can use these dollars, and can some of the $75 million be used to help with the filling the FAFSA applications?
I don't believe it can. It has to go to this income sharing agreement, the Career Accelerator Fund.
Specifically for that.
But I can get you some statistics, because InvestEd, what I've learned since engaging in this, they do have open house and career or college nights and all of that, and they put hold hundreds of those, I think, each year. And so I can get some data on that.
Appreciate it for
Yeah.
that. The second and final question, as it relates to the water infrastructure and the transportation and water infrastructure local grants, I know that this is specific to water, but wastewater impacts water infrastructure as well, especially if there's contamination, leakage, and all of that. I will be serving, I think, this summer on the wastewater task force. Are these dollars, are they going to be distributed to localities for projects, or are we going to, as a state, have maybe some say in suggesting leveraging those dollars instead of $80 million in year one, $80 million in year two? Can we multiply each dollar to benefit, through private-public partnerships or whatever to get it, multiply, for each dollar, get 3, 4, 5 more dollars? So do we have a say in that can we make recommendations to utilize some of these dollars out of that task force, or are they already spent?
Well, so, as I mentioned, the $50 million a year, I think the IFA has already received applications,
Okay.
probably from both water and wastewater. That's probably $800 million.
Got it. Yeah.
And so, but they're working this program in conjunction with the state revolving fund, which they've already used and are leveraging that. And so I would imagine Jim McGough and his team will be before your task force, this summer,
Testifying on
and
this.
they can speak to that
Excellent.
as
Well, I
well.
really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? All right, thanks, Chris. So years ago, Senator Kinley started a policy that if universities raise their tuition more than the CHE recommendation, they had to come in front of Budget Committee and, I don't know, explain themselves, I guess. First on the list would be Vin Sins and Tony Hahn.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Pleasure to be in front of you again in person. Tony Hahn, Vincennes University. And at the request of this body, I am here today to talk about the actions that we took, that our Board of Trustees took, regarding tuition and fees for the upcoming biennium. Just as a starting point, as a reminder, Vincennes University, current tuition annually for the whole year, $6,250. That is the lowest fully residential tuition anywhere in the state, because we do offer a full residential experience with 2- and 4-year degrees there on our Vincennes campus. The trustees took action earlier this year to increase that amount to $200 for a total of $6,450 for the coming year. Now, because of the low base, the low amount that it is, that does equate to 3.2%. So that does, in fact, exceed the commission's recommendation. In the same action, the trustees also chose to freeze our housing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, because what I want to lay out are some of our considerations for why we chose to freeze housing and why we raised tuition $200. Some of the operating considerations we have. The concept of our revenue mix, which we don't talk a lot about, but I'd like to, and our overall cost of attendance, which is very important for us as it relates to access and affordability. Because as a reminder, Vincennes University's mission is an open access campus, so we take students where they are, we meet them there and get them where they want to go. So, of course, we have operating cost pressures. Like most universities, human capital is our most expensive. In forecasting the upcoming year, we estimated health insurance increases of nearly 8%. Utilities, because of our utility increase of about 5%, and because of the technical nature of our education, we're at the end of life cycle for some of our equipment for either repair or replacement in the classroom setting. We also saw significant spikes in our property and liability and cybersecurity insurance, which were a bit of a surprise and affected this budget. Years ago, Vincennes instituted the first of its kind program review, where each program has to submit very detailed documentation each year justifying the financial viability of it, the students, the trend, the amount of tuition it generates, the space in which it uses, the total cost of really that program. And that has helped us make very strategic decisions about when to close or cease a program, when to strategically invest in other programs. But it also helps us reallocate money to areas of need from areas of surplus. And because we were able to do that, our initial estimates of nearly 8% increase in this year's budget, we were able to reduce by choosing not to refill certain faculty roles for a large savings that adds health insurance savings as well as payroll savings, putting off some replacement and opting for repair of certain equipment. And what that equates to is that we were able to meet the remainder of our budget operating deficit with reallocation and savings. And what that tuition increase results in is about 0.5% of our total revenue line in the budget. So because we're a low tuition school, the $200 increase across the year generates another 0.5% in our total revenue. So as we looked at our students and the mix of our students and the mix of our revenue, 60% of our revenue comes from the state. So we're very dependent on state funding and very appreciative of the $45 million we do receive in the annual operating appropriation, in addition to dual credit and the early college money that we receive. But that means 30% of our total revenue mix is tuition. So it has a multiplier effect where we have a smaller amount that's based on our tuition at a lower rate, and therefore to meet those expense obligations, the 3.2% then appears to be a larger part of our operating. Again, as we considered our students, we're over 60% Pell. We have a very high 21st century. We have our own generous institutional aid that comes from our foundation. And we realized the barriers to access and success for our students is not, in fact, tuition, but housing. Our housing is very similar to other residential institutions. It's about $10,000, $11,000 a year for room and board for the full year. So what we opted to do is create a $10,000 housing scholarship. No questions asked, no qualifications. If you live in our residence halls, you qualify for a $10,000 scholarship to be applied toward your housing. Because many of the 21st century or other generous state programs do not apply to housing, but only tuition. And so they can qualify for $10,000 for 2 years in housing, and what that actually does is it decreases their total cost of attendance by 28% and eliminates the main reason that our students take on debt when they leave our institution. So we feel that while we did in fact raise tuition, we think our strategy of incentivizing housing and reducing that barrier will actually lead to better access and affordability for the student in the long run, and hopefully help our students succeed. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. This took a lot of thought and a lot of hand-wringing by our financial staff and trustees, but we're very proud with what we're able to advertise to our students.
Thanks, Tony. Hey, I have to have you clarify something. So this $10,000 deal.
Yeah.
So the way you said it, you said no questions asked. So that means every student, if they apply, gets a $10,000 housing credit?
If you live in our residence halls, yes. It's over 2 years, you get $5,000 a year.
So how much is your residence hall a year?
$10,980 gets room and board all in. So it's going to pay for half.
So you're basically reducing your housing costs by half.
Yeah.
and raised by 50% and raising your tuition by 3.2 or something like
Yeah,
that.
which is $200.
Okay.
And we did a deep dive into the demographic of our students and saw how many of them are paying out of pocket for tuition and how many of them are on aid and others. And we realized it's a fraction of our, very small fraction of our students that actually pay their own tuition out of pocket.
Now, the 6450, is that in-state tuition?
Yes.
What's out-of-state tuition?
Well, we have arrangements with neighboring states to pay in-state tuition, so we don't have much of an out-of-state market.
Okay.
Since I can see Illinois from my office window at Vincennes, we offer them in-state tuition to encourage them to come over.
Okay. Any other questions?
We're a plus 95% resident university.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's your average debt for students coming out of Vincennes over a 2-year period and also your 4-year?
I don't have the 4-year number because we have a limited number of programs there. We often see transfers to other institutions or an associate degree completion. Average debt for after 2 years is going to be close to, the last I saw was about $13,000.
$13,000 for over a 2-year period?
13, yeah.
Any other questions?
And I'd be happy to get an update on that too, or some change over time.
That's an average.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that broken, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Are they broken down by demographics?
I might be able to do that. I don't have that on top of
I know,
mind, but I
okay.
might be able to.
I think that'd be good to know.
I think it's also important to talk about, with all institutions, debt of those who have any debt. Because at other institutions I've worked for and that I know, there's almost a majority sometimes of students that graduate with no debt through scholarship, merit, whatever. So you don't want that to skew the average. But I'm happy to dive into those numbers for you, Representative.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thanks, Tony.
All right, thank you.
Next, Aaron Trump and University of Southern Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't talk as long as Tony, partly because I'm not as eloquent, but I'll just say we did consider a lot of factors when we went through this with our trustees. Administration brought up quite a few proposals to our trustees when we set our tuition. Big consideration for us is always where our place is in the marketplace, where our place is in Evansville, the students we serve, the region we're in. Looking at this coming year, our increase for in-state tuition will be $163 over the course of the year. For the following year, it'll be $166. So this totals 2% increase over both years. Now, we considered a variety of factors, including our budget expenditures for the upcoming biennium increases we're seeing in utilities. Support staff is a big increase for us. In our market, what we're paying our support staff, we're having a lot of trouble keeping them from leaving to the private sector right now, and so we're having to increase those salaries to attract. Support staff is huge for us right now. We're short in maintenance, grounds, custodial services. We just can't retain those staff at what we're paying right now. State appropriation for our budget into 22-23, adjustments to the 2021 fiscal year budget, a variety of economic and inflation indicators, and also the Commission for Higher Education's recommendation. I'll say about that recommendation, we do consider that, and we consider it strongly, but looking at the recommendation for this year coming from the Commission in 17 and in 19, I'm still fairly new, so looking back to the last 2 cycles, they considered 6 different indexes in coming up with this recommendation. For 21, they only considered 1 index, and there's not really an understanding of why they didn't use a more comprehensive outlook into the marketplace when determining this recommendation. So in past years, they considered the Consumer Price Index urban less food and energy, education and communications, Midwest regional, the Higher Education Price Index, and the Higher Education Cost Adjustment. This year, they only considered one of those indicators, and it happened to be kind of the lower mid-level one within that. So if you were to use the measurements the way they've done it in the past for this year, the recommendation automatically goes up from 1.45 to 1.81. If you factor in quarter 1 numbers, which we have available, it goes up to 2.01. and now that we have quarter 2 available, it's 2.17. The odd choice too is to only use CPI Midwest and not the Higher Education Price Index, which in and of itself considers 8 different subject areas and about 100 different indicators. It's projecting a 2.49 going into this year. So we feel like we're following a typical methodology to get to this number. We're considering a lot of different factors and taking a more holistic look at our budget and the marketplace in general. Also, Indiana per capita personal income at the time it was set, 3-year projected increase was 4.32%, so we're well below that. We're not digging totally into the pockets of Hoosiers as their incomes are increasing. And if you factor in quarter 2 now, that's actually 7.8%. So our 2% increase relative to a 7.8% increase in per capita income, we feel like we're staying well below that and tracking with where the market's going with inflation and other items. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
So what percentage of your operating revenue comes from the state?
I have that right here. I believe it's 45%. In 2020, 2021, student fees is 40% of our budget, state appropriation is 52.7%, and outside income is 7.3%.
No, that's just operating, that's not facilities or capital or anything like that, that's just operating revenue?
Yes.
And then you mentioned that if a certain criteria was used, it would have been 2.49. Was that, I didn't catch what you said, so if they would have used the same criteria as they did last time, it would have been a 2.49?
If they would use the same criteria they used last time with the information they had at the end of 2020, it would have been 1.81. If they would have included quarter 1 numbers, which were available at the time the recommendation was set, it would have been 2.01. The indicator I was talking about is if I was going to choose one indicator out of the 6, the higher ed price index considers a variety already built into it, and it was 2.49.
All right, any questions? Zach?
Excuse me, Aaron. I think just before the pandemic, somewhere in there, you and President Rashawn and I met, and I think at that point he had mentioned that it had been like 2 years or so since you had provided salary increases to, I can't remember if that was professors or all staff.
All staff.
Has that been?
So at this point, we've not offered raises to any staff or faculty for 3 years. We are looking to do that going into this next fiscal year. We anticipate those will be 1 to 3%. Everybody essentially will get a 1% up to 3% based on merit. But we're still well behind the market for all of our staff, including faculty. But in particular, we have a lot of trouble maintaining support staff, new support staff in particular, from leaving for the private sector. What we're paying maintenance, grounds, custodial, an opportunity becomes open in Alcoa or Berry Global, and it's just hard to maintain. And we have some long-standing tenured people that have been around a long time. We have some custodial staff that have been with us 25, 30 years. They enjoy the institution. They're a little more loyal to it. But newer hires in the last couple of years, it's hard to retain them.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
If I could, sir, could I, Representative Porter, if I could answer your question that you asked to Tony. Our average debt load for a 4-year graduate is $21,000, and that is for students that have debt. We don't factor in this. Over 50% of our students graduate with no debt. We don't include that in that number to skew it. So that's of those with debt, 21,000 of those that graduate at 4 years.
Did I hear you say 50% graduates with 0 debt?
Right, and we don't factor them into that number. We don't want to skew that so that it's not an honest projection.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, sir.
All right, well, that concludes our discussion items. We're not going to meet in the month of August, so our next meeting will be in September, and we should have those dates out in the next week or two. So is there any questions from the committee? Representative Hamilton? Kind of. The goal will be somewhere in the central part of the state. So I'm non-committal right now. So with that, we'll adjourn. Safe travels.